The Yorktown Victory Monument was authorized by Continental Congress in 1781, just after the news of the British surrender reached Philadelphia. But actual construction began 100 years later and was completed in 1884. After 6 years of the American Revolution, both the British and Continental armies were exhausted. The British in hostile territory held only a few coastal areas in America, and on the other side of the Atlantic, Britain was also waging a global war with France and Spain. The American conflict was unpopular and divisive, and there was no end in sight. For the colonies, the long struggle for independence was leading to enormous debt, food shortages, and a lack of morale. General George Washington and his Continental Army had a decision to make in the spring of 1781. They could strike a decisive blow to the British in New York City, or aim for the South in Yorktown, Virginia, where General Charles Lord Cornwallis stationed his troops. General Washington decided to march hundreds of miles from their headquarters north of New York City to Yorktown, making this the largest troop movement of the American Revolution. Meanwhile, in the fall of 1781, the British occupy Yorktown, where Cornwallis intends to resupply his 9,000-man army. While he awaits supplies and much-needed reinforcements from the Royal Navy, the Continental Army seizes an opportunity. On receiving word that the French fleet will be available for a siege, Washington and French General Rochambeau moved their force of almost 8,000 men south to Virginia, planning to join and lead about 12,000 other militia, French troops, and Continental troops in a siege of Yorktown. While the Allied army is still en route, the French fleet guards the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. The Royal Navy, attempting to sail up the bay to meet Cornwallis, is met by the French warships at the mouth of the Chesapeake. In this encounter, called the Battle of the Capes, the British fleet is soundly defeated and forced to abandon Cornwallis's army at Yorktown. On September 28th, after a grueling march, the American and French forces arrive near Yorktown and immediately begin the hard work of laying siege to Cornwallis and his men. Cornwallis has thrown up fortified structures called redoubts on the outskirts of Yorktown. With the help of French engineers, American and French troops begin to dig a series of parallel trenches, which bring troops and artillery close enough to inflict damage on the British, who are hunkered down in Yorktown. The British use what little artillery they have left to disrupt the Americans and the French, but their efforts prove to be futile. The Allied lines are now within musket range of the British, and the American and French artillery are in place. In the afternoon on October 9th, the Allied barrage begins, and for nearly a week, the artillery barrage is ceaseless. Then, under cover of darkness, Washington orders troops to dig a second parallel line 400 yards closer to the British lines. British redoubts number 9 and number 10 prevent the second parallel from extending all the way to the river. They will have to be taken by force. But Washington's new line is in place by the morning of October 12th. On a moonless night, after firing incessant artillery to weaken British defenses, American and French forces prepared a surprise assault on redoubts number 9 and 10. They attacked with unloaded muskets because they were concerned that an accidental musket firing might give away their surprise attack. Colonel Alexander Hamilton's force of 400 men assaulted redoubt number 10 with bayonets fixed but muskets unloaded. A British sentry fired at the Americans, but the Americans proceeded to assault the fortification, climbing over the parapet and descending into the redoubt. The British were overwhelmed. It was a stunning victory for the Americans, with only 34 casualties. The French simultaneously assaulted Redoubt Number 9, and after an equally fierce fight, they wrested control from the British. Today, we see memorial plaques honoring the Americans and French who fought at Redoubts Number 9 and 10. Cornwallis's position was now untenable, as the French-American alliance had artillery on 3 of his sides, and there was a French Navy blockade in Chesapeake Bay. On October 17th, that morning, a lone British drummer boy, with a British officer waving a white handkerchief tied to the end of his sword, was seen at the front of the British lines. Blindfolded and brought inside American lines, the British officer secured terms of surrender for the British Army. On October 19th, in a field outside of Yorktown, capitulation took place as British troops and their German Hessian allies, with flags furled and cased, quietly marched between the American and French soldiers.